Turin, Italia. It is the most studied object in human history. More research hours have been dedicated to it than to any artifact ever discovered. Hundreds of scientists from dozens of disciplines over more than a century of investigation. And after all of that, after all of the laboratories and all of the tests and all of the peer-reviewed papers, nobody can explain it. It is a piece of linen cloth, 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. On it, the faint image of a man, beaten, crucified, dead, and the science surrounding it has shaken the foundations of what we thought was possible. This is the Shroud of Turin, and in 2025, what scientists just found may be the most important discovery in the history of human civilization. The Shroud of Turin is a rectangular piece of herringbone-woven linen, measuring 4.4 meters long and 1.1 meters wide. On one side of the cloth, there are two faint images of a human body, front and back, head to head, as if the body was laid on one half of the cloth and the other half was folded over the top. The images are extraordinarily detailed. A man with long hair, a beard, his hands folded across his pelvis, wounds visible on his wrists, his feet, his side, his head. The wounds are consistent with Roman crucifixion, down to details that were not publicly known when the cloth first appeared in medieval Europe, details that forensic science only confirmed centuries later. This cloth knew things that the people who first saw it did not yet know. The cloth first appears in recorded history in 1354. In a small church in Liéry, France, a knight named Geoffroy de Charny displayed it, and pilgrims came from across Europe to see it. The local bishop was suspicious. He called it a forgery. He said an artist had confessed to painting it. But here is the problem. No artist's confession was ever produced. No name was ever given. And when scientists finally examined the cloth, 700 years later, they found no paint, no pigment, no dye, no brush strokes, no artist's medium of any kind. Whatever made the image on this cloth, it was not a painter. The bishop was wrong. But the mystery he raised was only the beginning. The shroud traveled from France to Italy. In 1578, it was transferred to Turin, where it has remained ever since, housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. For centuries, it was displayed occasionally, venerated by millions, dismissed by skeptics, and protected carefully by the Catholic Church. Then, in 1898, something happened that changed everything. A photographer named Secondo Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud. The first photographs ever taken of it. He developed his glass plate negatives late that night, and when the image emerged in the developing tray, he nearly dropped it. The negatives, which should have shown a photo negative of the cloth, revealed instead a strikingly detailed, three-dimensional, photographic positive image of a human face. The image on the shroud was itself already a negative, which means it was not painted, because no painter in 1354 would have painted a photographic negative. Photography had not been invented yet for another 500 years. The shroud is not just an image, it is a medical document. The bloodstains on the cloth have been analyzed by forensic pathologists, medical examiners, and trauma surgeons. Their conclusion is consistent. The wounds on this cloth represent a real human body that suffered real injuries in a specific sequence, consistent with Roman crucifixion. There are approximately 120 scourge marks across the back and front of the body, consistent with the Roman flagrum, a whip with small metal balls and bone fragments attached to leather straps. The pattern of the wounds suggests two different flagrums were used, indicating two soldiers, one on each side, taking turns. This is consistent with Roman practice, a detail not publicly documented until the modern era. The cloth already knew. The nails. Popular tradition shows nails through the palms of Jesus. Every painting, every crucifix, for 2,000 years, palms. The shroud shows something different. The nail wounds are through the wrists, specifically through a region called the desto space, a gap between the carpal bones of the wrist. Medical researchers tested this. When a nail is driven through the desto space, the median nerve is severed, which causes the thumb to involuntarily fold inward against the palm. Look at the image on the shroud. There are 4 fingers visible on each hand. No thumbs. The thumbs are folded inward, exactly as the anatomy demands. No medieval artist knew this. No one in 1354 knew this. Medical science confirmed it in the 20th century. The cloth knew, for 600 years before anyone else did. The blood. The blood on the shroud has been tested, and it is real human blood, type AB positive, containing bilirubin at unusually high levels. Bilirubin is a substance released into the blood by a damaged liver. When a person is under extreme traumatic stress, when the body is being beaten severely over an extended period, the high bilirubin levels indicate that the man on the shroud suffered enormous physical trauma before he died. Furthermore, the blood flowed in specific directions. The patterns on the arms show blood flowing at 2 different angles, consistent with a body shifting positions on a cross, alternately pushing up with the feet to breathe, then dropping down again. This is exactly how crucifixion kills. The victim dies of asphyxiation, unable to keep pushing up, unable to breathe. The blood on this cloth recorded the precise physical mechanics of a Roman crucifixion in a level of detail that should have been impossible. In 1978, the Catholic Church made an extraordinary decision. They allowed a team of American scientists direct physical access to the Shroud of Turin. For 5 days, the team was called STURP, the Shroud of Turin Research Project. 33 scientists from prestigious American universities and laboratories, physicists, chemists, biologists, forensic specialists, optical experts, medical doctors. They brought over $80,000 worth of equipment, ultraviolet fluorescence cameras, X-ray fluorescence analyzers, infrared spectroscopy devices, microscopes, spectrophotometers. They worked around the clock for 5 consecutive days, testing every aspect of the cloth. They took samples, they measured, they photographed, they analyzed. They came to Turin as skeptics. Most of them, they expected to prove it was a forgery. They did not prove it was a forgery. They did not prove it was a forgery. Their findings were published in peer-reviewed journals. Over the following years, the conclusions were remarkable. No paint, no pigment, no dye, no stain, no foreign substance of any kind was responsible for the image. The image was not on the surface of the fibers. It was in the fibers, in the topmost layer of each thread, the outermost fibrils, changed in color at the molecular level, as if by a process of controlled dehydration or oxidation. No known artistic technique could produce this. No medieval technology, no modern technology. The STURP team leader, Dr. John Jackson, described the image formation mechanism as scientifically inexplicable. He was not a man who used those words lightly. He had a doctorate from UCLA. He worked for the United States Air Force. He was not given to mysticism, but he looked at the data and he said, "We cannot explain this." There was one more discovery that stopped the scientists. The image on the shroud contains 3-dimensional information. A normal photograph is flat. When you put it into a 3D image analyzer, you get a distorted mess, because photographs are not encoded with depth information. The scientists put the shroud image into a VP8 image analyzer, a device used by NASA to convert satellite data into 3D terrain maps. The image transformed into a perfect 3-dimensional relief of a human face and body. every contour correct, every shadow representing actual depth. The distance of the cloth from the body encoded in the brightness of the image. A photograph cannot do this. A painting cannot do this. No known two-dimensional image contains this kind of spatial information. Except the shroud, the VP8 data suggested something extraordinary, that the image was formed by something emanating from within the body itself, outward, through the cloth, encoding distance and depth as it went. Dr. Jackson looked at those results and quietly began to consider something he had not expected to consider: the resurrection. In 1988, the Catholic Church agreed to one more test: radiocarbon dating. 3 independent laboratories, Oxford University in England, the University of Arizona, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, they each received small samples cut from a corner of the shroud. They tested them independently, without knowledge of each other's results, and they agreed. The cloth dated to between 1260 and 1390 AD, medieval, consistent with a forgery. The announcement was immediate and global, headline news around the world. The Shroud of Turin is a medieval fake. Science has spoken. Case closed. Except, it was not closed, not even close. The problems with the 1988 carbon dating began to emerge almost immediately. First, the sample. Subsequent research revealed that the corner of the shroud from which samples were taken was almost certainly a medieval repair, a patch sewn onto the cloth sometime in the 14th century after damage from fire or water. The repaired area used different thread, dyed to match the original. This was confirmed by chemical analysis, by infrared spectroscopy, by researchers including Dr. Raymond Rogers of Los Alamos National Laboratory, one of the original STIRP scientists. Rogers found that the sample area contained cotton fibers and a dye called madder root, neither of which is present in the rest of the shroud. The laboratories in 1988 had carbon dated a medieval repair patch, not the original cloth. The dating was not wrong, the sample was wrong, and that changes everything. First, Dr. Rogers published his findings in the peer-reviewed journal Thermochimica Acta in 2005. He was not a religious man. He had gone into the research intending to support the carbon dating results. He said so publicly. Instead, the evidence led him somewhere else. His analysis of the remaining STIRP samples suggested the main body of the cloth was far older than the medieval period. His calculations placed the original linen at somewhere between 1,300 and 3,000 years old. That range includes the 1st century, the time of Jesus. Rogers died in 2005, the same year his paper was published. He never saw the full implications of his work unfold, but he left behind a data set that continues to reshape the debate. The 1988 result had not settled the question. It had only deepened it. In October 2025, an international conference on the Shroud of Turin was held. Scientists from around the world gathered to present new findings, and the results were extraordinary. Professor Giulio Fanti of the University of Padua in Italy presented the most significant new evidence. His team had conducted mechanical testing, chemical testing, and X-ray fluorescence analysis on shroud fibers from samples collected in 1978 by the STIRP team. His results placed the date of the cloth at between 300 BC and 400 AD, with the most probable date in the 1st century. This directly contradicts the 1988 result and supports the possibility that the cloth is old enough to have wrapped the body of Jesus of Nazareth. But the dating was not the most significant thing Fanti presented. His team had detected something in the blood samples that had never been found before: radioactivity and neutron emissions, specifically beta radioactivity, and what appeared to be evidence of a neutron flux event, a burst of neutrons emanating from the body. At the moment of image formation, Fanti proposed that this neutron emission could have altered the carbon-14 ratio in the cloth, which would explain why the 1988 test returned a date that was too recent. The neutrons would have created new carbon-14 in the fibers, making the cloth appear younger than it actually is. And what would cause a human body to emit a burst of neutrons? Professor Fanti, a physicist, a man of rigorous science, offered one answer. He called it a resurrection event. To be clear about what Fanti is proposing, he is not a theologian, he is not a preacher, he is a professor of mechanical and thermal measurement at one of the oldest universities in the world. He is saying, based on physical evidence, that the image on the Shroud of Turin was formed by a burst of energy emanating from within the body, that this energy was so intense it permanently altered the molecular structure of the linen fibers, in precise correspondence with every surface of the body, encoding three-dimensional spatial information into a two-dimensional cloth, and that this event coincides with and may be the physical signature of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He further found three distinct types of blood and fluorescent reactions with properties not found anywhere else in any other object in the known world. The shroud is not like anything else that has ever existed, and science, after more than a century of trying, still cannot explain it. There is one more layer of evidence that most people never hear about. In 1973, a Swiss criminologist named Max Frey was granted permission to take sticky tape samples from the surface of the shroud. His job was to collect any trace particles, dust, microscopic debris, anything adhering to the cloth. What he found was remarkable. Pollen, specifically pollen from 58 different plant species. That is not unusual for an old cloth. What is unusual is where those plants grow. 28 of the 58 species are unique to the area around Jerusalem. They do not grow in Europe. They do not grow in France. They do not grow in northern Italy. They grow only in the region of ancient Judea. The cloth had been in Jerusalem, botanically provable, beyond reasonable scientific dispute. But Frey went further. Several of the plant species whose pollen was found bloom only in the spring, in the months of March and April. In Jerusalem, the timing of those blooms corresponds exactly to the timing of Passover, the time when Jesus of Nazareth was arrested, tried, crucified, and buried. Furthermore, archaeobotanist Dr. Avinoam Danin of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem identified pollen and plant images pressed into the cloth itself, specifically the rock rose, Cistus creticus, a plant that flowers in Jerusalem in March and April, and the crown chrysanthemum, Chrysanthemum coronarium, which in Jewish tradition was used in burial preparations. The cloth was not just near these plants, they were pressed against it, as if placed there as part of a burial in Jerusalem in the spring. The evidence was building, layer upon layer. A cloth with the image of a crucified man, formed by a process science cannot replicate or explain, containing real human blood type AB, with wounds consistent with Roman crucifixion, including details unknown to medieval forgers, with pollen from Jerusalem plants, blooming in spring, with burial flowers pressed into the weave, with three-dimensional spatial information encoded in the image, with neutron emission signatures consistent with an extreme energy event. Every layer of evidence points in the same direction. The same direction. You do not have to be a believer to follow the evidence where it leads. You only have to be honest